Last time we established that psi mod squared acts as the probability density for finding a particle at position x. Today we start with a question that sounds almost too simple. If you add up the probability everywhere over all space, what should you get? Well, the particle has to be somewhere, not maybe somewhere, definitely somewhere. So if we take this probability density and integrate it over all x from minus infinity to plus infinity, the answer has to come out to exactly 100%. Or in the language we'll use from now on, exactly 1, which means that the particle must exist somewhere inside the universe. That's the normalization condition. It looks almost too obvious to write down, but don't let the simplicity fool you. Without this single requirement, the entire statistical interpretation of quantum mechanics falls apart. Every probability we ever calculate depends on this equation being true. But here's a subtlety worth pausing on. Psi isn't something we get to choose freely. It's completely determined by the Schrödinger equation. So are we even allowed to also demand that it comes out normalized? Isn't that asking for two separate things at once? Here's the resolution. Look closely and notice that every single term has exactly one factor of psi in it. That means the equation is linear, and linearity has a wonderful consequence. If psi solves the equation, then a times psi solves it too, for absolutely any constant a. The equation doesn't care how big psi or small the wave function is, it only cares about its shape. So there's a free dial here, an amplitude we haven't pinned down yet, and that's exactly the knob we turn to make the total probability come out to 1. This process, choosing A just right, is what we call normalizing the wave function. Now here's the catch. Not every solution of Schrödinger equation can actually be normalized. Some wave functions decay nicely, the area under the probability curve is finite, and we can normalize them just fine. But others never die off at all. Try to add up their probability over all space and you get infinity, no matter what constant you multiply by. And there's an even more obvious troublemaker, the trivial solution, psi equals 0 everywhere, which technically solves the equation but represents nothing at all. Solutions like these can describe a real particle. We throw them out, what's left? The solutions whose total probability comes out finite are called square-integrable, and these are exactly the physically realizable states. I has to die off faster than 1 over the square root of x. Way out at large distances or normalization is flatly impossible. And one more detail worth banking for later. The constant A can always be written as the size times the phase. A equals its modulus times e to the I theta. Normalizing only pins down the size. The phase theta stays completely free. And as we'll see down the line, it never shows up in anything we can actually measure. So we have normalized the psi at some starting point, say t equals 0, but psi doesn't just sit there, it evolves in time according to Schrödinger equation. So here's the real question. As time goes on, does that total probability stay equal to 1 or could it drift away, become 1.3, 0.8 or something else entirely? If the answer is no, if normalization doesn't survive, the entire statistical interpretation collapses the moment after we set it up. This isn't a minor technicality. We need an actual proof. Let's build it carefully. We want the rate of change of that integral. Notice something subtle in the notation on the left. We use a total derivative d by dt because once you have integrated over all x, what's left is function of t alone. But on the right, inside the integral, psi still depends on both x and t. So, so there we need a partial derivative instead. Now bring in the product rule. Psi mod square is just psi star times psi. So differentiating it in time gives two terms. One where the time derivative lands on psi and one where it lands on psi star. To go further, we need to know what those time derivatives actually are. And that's exactly what the Schrödinger equation tells us. Here it is, rearranged to isolate d psi by dt. Take its complex conjugate and you get a twin equation of d psi star over dt. Notice the pattern, every factor of I flips its sign, but we stay exactly where it was, because the potential energy is a real number. Let's substitute those two expressions in and expand everything out. I'll write d2 psi over dx square with a shorthand, two little x's as a subscript just to keep this on one line. Look closely at what we get. Four terms in total, and two of them involve potential V. Watch those two. They are identical in every way except their sign. One positive, one's negative. They cancel completely. That leaves something clean. The time derivative of psi mod squared, written purely in second derivative of x, no potential energy left inside. And here's the clever step, the trick that makes the whole proof work. The combination of second derivative secretly hiding a simpler structure. Run the product rule backwards and you can show it's actually the x derivative of something much simpler, psi star times the slope of psi minus the slope of psi star times psi. So we have written a rate of change in time as slope in space. That might not look like progress yet, but it's exactly what we need for the next step. Now we integrate both sides over all x. Because the right hand side is already written as the derivative in x, the integral values itself straight from the fundamental theorem of calculus. What's left is the whole expression evaluated at the two boundaries, plus infinity and minus infinity. And here's where everything we said earlier about normalizable wave function pays off. Remember, for psi to be normalizable in first place, it has to die away to zero out at the edges. Way out towards x approaching plus or minus infinity is the so does its slope, which means that boundary term is exactly zero both ends every single time. And that gives us the result, the rate of change of probability is zero. It never changes. If psi is normalized at t equals to 0, it is just normalized forever. That's not an assumption we are making, it's something the Schrödinger equation guarantees automatically. Watch what this actually looks like. As time goes on, a wave packet can spread out, change shape completely, even flatten out dramatically. But the total area underneath the total probability never budges from 1. Before we move on, two things worth trying yourself. First, a triangular wave function, normalize it and work out where the particle is most likely to be found. Second, decaying exponential wave function, normalize that one too and find its spread, its standard deviation. Let's turn to a new question. As the wave function evolves, how do we track the particle's average position? We define the expectation value of x like this, multiply x by probability density and integrate over everything. But here's where people often get tripped up. What does this average actually mean physically? It doesn't mean take one single particle, measure its position over and over and average those results out. Watch what happens if you try that. The very first measurement collapses the wave function down to a sharp spike right at where the particle was found. Measure again on that same particle and you get the same answer every time. There's no averaging happening at all. What the expectation value actually describes is an ensemble. Imagine many identical copies of the same system, each prepared in exactly the same state psi. You measure each one exactly once and only once. Do this many times and patterns of results traces out the shape of psi squared is set. Average all those individual measurements together and that average is what expectation value of x means. Now that we know expectation value of x, a natural question is how fast does it change with time? Let's differentiate it and we can reuse the identity we just proved for time derivative of size mod square. Plugging that in, we get an x derivative sitting inside an integral over x. That strong hint that integration by parts is about to help us out. Quick reminder of how that works. You can peel a derivative of one factor in a product and hand it to another factor. It costs you a minus sign and it hands you a boundary term. Do that here. Peel the x derivative of the bracket and let it land on the x instead. The boundary terms vanishes for the same reason as before. Psi dies off at infinity. What's left is this. One more integration by parts, this time on the second piece, and everything collapses down to a clean result. The rate of change of the expectation value of x expressed as a single integral involving psi star and the slope of psi. Here's a natural assumption to make. Expectation value of velocity should just be the rate of change of expectation value of position. It's the quantum analogy of what velocity always meant. And since momentum is just mass times velocity, that hands us an expression for the expectation value of p, mass times the derivative of expectation value of x with respect to t, which using what we just found becomes this integral. Now watch this. Let's write both the expectation value of x and expectation value of p in exactly same shape. Expectation value of x is psi star times x times psi integrated, and the expectation value of momentum is psi star times the minus I h bar times the derivative with respect to x times psi integrated. That something in the middle is what we call an operator. Think of an operator as a little machine. Feed it a function and it hands you back in a different function. The position operator is about as simple as it gets. It just multiplies whatever you feed it by x. The momentum operator is little more interesting. It differentiates whatever you feed it with respect to x and then multiplies the result with minus IH bar. And here's the payoff. Every classical quantity you think of, kinetic energy, angular momentum, anything, can be written in terms of x and p. So to find the expectation value of any of them, replace every p with its operator and with the whole thing between psi star and psi and integrate. Kinetic energy is perfect example. Since T equals P square over 2m, its operator version gives us this minus h bar squared over 2m times the second derivative sandwiched and integrated. Two more to sit with on your own. First, in the middle step of our derivative of expectation value of x, why can't you just integrate by parts, say using the time derivative directly? Something about it doesn't quite work. Figure out what. Second, add a constant to the potential energy and classically nothing happens at all. But quantum mechanically, psi picks up an extra phase vector. See if you can show where the phase comes from. One more natural question, how does the expectation value of p changes over time? Working through the derivation, a great one to try yourself, you arrive at this. The rate of change of expectation value of momentum equals the expectation value of minus the derivative of v with respect to x. Now compare that with Newton's second law from classical mechanics. Force equals mass times acceleration. which is the same as saying the rate of change of momentum is equals minus the slope of potential energy. Look how similar those two equations are. This is Ehrenfest Theorem, and its message runs deep. Expectation values obey the classical equations of motion. Quantum mechanics doesn't contradict Newton, it reproduces him on average across an ensemble. Let's switch gears for a moment and build some intuition with something far more familiar than quantum mechanics, a rope. Imagine holding one end of a very long rope and shaking it up and down. Steadily, rhythmically, you get a wave train, ripples marching down the whole length of the rope. Ask yourself, what's the wavelength of this wave? Easy question, you can measure it, maybe about 6 feet between threads. But ask where the wave actually is, and that question suddenly feels a little silly. It spreads across entire 50 feet of rope. Wave position here is basically undefined. Now try the position. Instead of shaking steadily, give the rope one single sharp jerk. Now you get one localized bump traveling down the rope. Ask where it is, and that's an easy question, right there obviously. But ask what's its wavelength, and that question feels silly now. It doesn't even repeat, so wavelength barely means anything here. There is an inescapable trade-off buried in these two pictures. The more precisely defined the position of wave, the less precisely defined its wavelength, and the reverse is just as true. You can't have both sharply defined at the same time, and this isn't some quirk of ropes. It's true of every wave phenomena there is, which means it's true of quantum mechanic wave function psi too. So how does a spread and wavelength connect back to quantum mechanics? Through the de Broglie relation, which ties the wavelength of psi directly to the particle's momentum. Momentum equals h over lambda are equivalently 2 pi h bar over lambda, which means a spread in wavelength becomes a spread in momentum, and well-defined position comes at the cost of all ill-defined momentum. Exactly the trade-off we just saw with the rope. Now translate into the language of quantum mechanics. Made completely quantitative, this becomes sigma x times sigma p is greater than or equal to h bar over 2. This is the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, probably the single most famous equation in all of quantum mechanics. With normalization, momentum, and uncertainty principle now in hand, we have built the complete toolkit for describing a quantum state. Next time, we put all of it to work solving the Schrödinger equation for real physical potentials.